welcome everybody. Jen, is there something going on in the background there? Somebody maybe muted. No, okay. Just we're trying to get this thing going. Okay, so welcome everybody to Pivot. This is I think our 5th lecture, and we're really lucky today. We have a very special guest with us today, Jen Walton from Short and Sweet BNB. Wave hi, Jen.
Hi.
There she is. And we're going to hear from her in about 5 or 10 minutes. But as you know, you have to listen to me do an introduction first. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. And I'll do a little introduction and then we'll get going. Jen, can you see my screen okay?
Yeah.
All right. So today we're going to hear from Jen Walton, Short and Sweet BNB, and how she went from 0 properties in 2017 to over 150 third-party managed Airbnb properties in just 3 years. An amazing story. She's got an incredible story and an incredible brand, and I can't wait to hear about it. And Jen, the course is focused on trying to teach. We've got about 70 or 71 students in the course. They can't all make it from noon till 1:30 Eastern time, 9 till 10:30 Pacific time. They can't all make it live, but many of them can view it and will view it, of course, tonight or over the weekend. So we are recording it, and there you go. So here's my introduction. You know, I talk a lot for people who follow me in real estate, because I do some business coaching and I do some real estate investment coaching. For people who follow me on the real estate side, you know, I talk about property animation, and that's not Disney animation. I use the term as how do you add additional revenue streams to your properties. And Airbnb for a number of years, and vacation rental by owner and other platforms have been part of that animation process. And you're going to see, I'm going to give you a little example before I turn it over to Jennifer. Genevieve, or Jennifer, how do you say your first name properly?
You can just do Jen, but it's Genevieve.
Genevieve, okay. I think I'll do Jen because I might stumble over it again. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Now, this picture, by the way, is not a picture of Jen, obviously. Here's a picture of Jen, you know, from her Short and Sweet a website. But something you don't know, Jen, is that before there was Airbnb, there was something called PETA, P-E-T-A, Presidential Executive Travel Apartments. Believe it or not, it's now 30 years ago. I was in the Airbnb business with my wife, Dawn McMillan, before there was Airbnb. And we called it Presidential Executive Travel Apartments. It was very similar to Airbnb. And on this screen here, you can see some condos that we bought. We bought, I think, 16 ground floor condos at a location in downtown Ottawa called Holland Cross. And the reason we bought these ground floor units that nobody else seemed to want is each of those ground floor condos had access to the outside. So if somebody, busy executive came to visit with us, and arrive late at night, at midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning, he or she could get access to these units in a very simple, direct manner. So they wouldn't bother the people up in the tower, and we put them on short-term rental. And so we, back then, Jen, these units were renting for about $1,000 a month, but we furnished them beautifully. Diane Beaulieu, a wonderful interior designer, furnished them for us, designed it and furnished it for us. And our rents went from about $1,000 a month to $3,000 a month on a short-term basis. And then later on, when I got the National Hockey League team, the Ottawa Senators, we would put, we'd get players, we'd trade for players. Rather than putting them in hotels, we put them in these beautiful 1- and 2-bedroom, what would today be an Airbnb or vacation rental by owner on a short-term basis. And it was better for families, especially the players with families or busy executives, to stay in a 1- or 2-bedroom than it was to stay in a hotel. And it was also actually, frankly, cheaper to stay in one of our presidential executive travel apartments than it was to stay in a hotel. So I just wanted to show you some of the numbers. This is, like I said, it's going back, 30 years. And we had a total of 28 of these units, not as many as Jen has. She has over 150, but we had 28 of them. And we were generating net operating income, that's NOI, of about $50,000 a month. And we didn't have any mortgages on it. So that was cash money, money you could touch, feel, and spend. So it was a pretty successful business for us. And you can see that the cap rate, for those of you who know a little bit about real estate, cap rate is just another way of saying return on investment or cash on cash return, was a really good 18 or 19%, better than what you get in your bank. Um, and then I had this great idea, to go on a big adventure, which was to land an expansion franchise from the National Hockey League for Ottawa. And you know what they say about NHL teams? You may have heard me say this once or twice before. They say the second happiest business day of your life is when you get an NHL franchise, but the happiest is the day you sell it, because money only seems to go one way in NHL teams, in, never out. So I put a tremendous amount of money, about $500 million into the building and into the team, and it was a big adventure. But if I could go back and tell that 39-year-old Prof. Bruce one thing, what would that be before I went on the big adventure of getting an NHL team? And that is, you better watch out, right? I mean, it's a big gamble. $500 million, it was about $485 million to be exact, is a big risk to take on any one project. And of course, that project, many of you know, it's public knowledge, in the mid-2000s or the early 2000s, the Sens went broke and I had to restart my career, right? So what would I tell that 39-year-old Prof. Bruce? I would tell him one thing, and that is, you should have put those 28 units in the name of your spouse. My spouse, you can see her here, she was a stay-at-home mom. We have 5 kids, and her risk profile was much lower than mine. I'm the entrepreneur. I'm the crazy entrepreneur, and she was a stay-at-home mom then. And if I had put those 28 units in her name rather than my name, when the Sens went bankrupt, they wouldn't have run away, right? So what would my life today at age 68 be like if we had those 28 units producing $50,000 a month in income, right? I might not be coaching today. I might not be teaching you today. I might be in Costa Rica, right? Having a sip of rum. So that's one of the things that I wanted to make sure you guys understand, that as you become successful entrepreneurs, entrepreneurship goes up, but it can also go down. And I would like to say that my career has only been, up, 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 but that would not be true. It's had lots of ups, but it's had a few downs, at least one anyway. So my wife says to me this: you are not required to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm, which is kind of a harsh way of saying that as an entrepreneur, you do have to be thinking of protecting yourself and your family in case things do go wrong. Because many of you, hopefully all of you, are starting some kind of a side hustle, some kind of a gig. And I want to make sure you at least hear from me at least once or twice in this course that it's really important for you to think about how to creditor proof yourself. By creditor proofing, I don't mean you hide money in the Cayman Islands, or dig a hole in your backyard and put the treasure box in there. I just mean, simple things that I could have easily have done in the 80s and the early 90s, which would have put those 28 units in solely in my wife's name. So when the Sens went bankrupt, everything would run away. All right. So that's where I'm at. But I'm happy to tell you, like Zoolander said, even though we had a major setback, for me anyway, at age 54, we're back. So what did we do? I'll show you one of our units. Jen, you might find this kind of cute. We have a few rental properties that we own, my wife and I and our family. And this is one of them. And we had a garage that wasn't being used in a rental property. And so what we did was we converted it to an Airbnb. So this is a real garage door. It still opens. And on the few days of summer that we get in Ottawa, which is a pretty cold city most of the time, you can actually open it up and you can pretend like you're in Hawaii on a beautiful day like it is today. But you can see here, it also has a person door here. So this garage door is a special order. It came from Montreal, and it cost about $4,000 to buy and install. And it gives you an R12 insulation factor. So we were able to convert our garage into an Airbnb. You'll see more of it here. And now you can see we have a 14,000 BTU gas fireplace here. So it's nice and warm. And you can see the floor is made out of epoxy resin. And we have a small but fully functional kitchen. And it's furnished by my wife, who has good taste in everything except men. And you can see the kitchen a little bit better here And we don't put dining rooms in because people don't seem to have enough time to sit down and have dinner. So it's just a lunch counter. You can see that here. Got a little bit of a seating area here. Then if you go around the corner, there's this bedroom, and the bedroom is quite nice. It has a full tech package, so everything you would want. We have Spotify, we have Netflix, Crave TV, HBO, you name it, we've got it. So lots of things to see and do and listen to. It's got a stacked washer and dryer. It's got a full bathroom. It even has a wet bar here. So it's pretty nice. And here are the numbers. And you can see I just put on the screen here. I won't go through every single row because I want to get to Jen's presentation as soon as I can. But this micro suite, this Airbnb, cost about $50,000. So it's not really that cheap. By the time you do the floor and the gas fireplace and the bathroom and all these other things you can see on the screen, you can read them for yourself, it was about $50,000. But if you look at the numbers we were able to generate on Airbnb, it was pretty good. We were averaging throughout the year about $135 a night, and we were averaging about 18 nights a month. So that was about a 60 or 70% occupancy. I'm sure we're going to hear from Jen that hers have a higher occupancy, but ours were about 60 or 70% occupied. Summer months almost full, and winter months a little bit less. But if you look at the cap rate at the bottom here, 37.9%. That's your return on investment. So if I had left that $50,000 in my bank account, maybe the bank gives me 1 or 2%. So Addie, you can just put up your hand, okay? I can see you on the screen there. What's better, $19,000 a year from the Airbnb, or maybe $1,000 from the bank? Airbnb is your right hand, and the bank is the left. There you go. Skill testing question, wasn't hard, right? So 37.9% cap rate in real estate is insane, right? It's very good. People are buying properties in Toronto and Vancouver and Los Angeles and San Francisco with 1% and 2% and 3% cap rates. So when you tell them that you're getting, 30 or 40%, they don't believe you. All right. And then came something we all know about. Unfortunately, many people are passing away. The greatest generation ever are passing away. We're in an era called the COVID-19 era, for sure. And we had to pivot because our bookings, and we're going to hear from Jen how she's managed to pivot around COVID-19, but our bookings went from whatever they were to 0. So we had to pivot. That's why the course is called Pivot. We had to pivot away from Airbnb, and we went into the long-term rental market. We have it now rented to a nice young man for a couple of years. But if you look at our return went from almost $20,000 a year to $10,000 a year. So our return has dropped by half. Right? So, I'm sure if Jen were running it, she would have had a better solution. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited to hear from her. All right, so let's go back now. Let's get back to Jen, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Jen, in a minute. How did Jen come up with the idea? Because a lot of the people in this course have been emailing me and say, how do you come up with a good idea? That's a really, really tough question, right? Where do great ideas come from? And how did she finance it? She went from 0 to 150 miles an hour in 3 years. How did she do that? And how did she know it was the right idea? And was she scared of failing? A lot of people are scared to fail. I don't like failing. I'm sure you don't either. Where did her courage come from to start the business? She was in a very good job before, she left to go out on her own. That's a kind of a scary thing. And then how did she find her first clients? How do you find your first landlord who trusts you enough to turn their property into an Airbnb? And then, of course, we want to hear from Jen how she's pivoting around COVID-19. So here's the last slide, Jen, before I turn it over to you. This is a little bit of background on Jen. She grew up in London, Ontario, great city. She attended Carleton University's Sprott School of Business, where I taught for many years, by the way. And she got her BCom in 2016 from the school. Interestingly, her parents were entrepreneurs. They ran a toy store in London. And you see on the right-hand side of the screen that, there are many different routes to becoming an entrepreneur. But one of the surest ways, I think, is if your mom or dad or one of your grandfathers or grandmothers was an entrepreneur. It does tend to run in families. That doesn't mean if your grandfather wasn't an entrepreneur or your mom wasn't an entrepreneur, you can't be. Absolutely, you can learn to be an entrepreneur. I mean, otherwise I couldn't teach this course, right? But it certainly does help, I think. And I just have a quote from Jen that I'm going to read. "I was really fortunate," she says, "to have parents who were both entrepreneurs. They taught me a lot, just for example, around the dinner table." So there is some of that learned by osmosis thing that does, I think, help. Then before she went out on her own, she worked for a very well-known property management group called CLV, and she is a volunteer, an educator, and an entrepreneur. So I think that's enough from me, Jen, and I'm going to transition now to your slides, and I want to hear from you, and I know everybody else does too. All right, Jen, over to you. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. I'm actually very excited to be here because whenever I do one of your webinars, the people on here are very engaged and very excited to learn more about entrepreneurship and the real estate market. So I do encourage anyone, if you have any questions, just ask along the way. I will say I'm maybe not the most graceful presenter you ever have. I deal with contractors every day. So if I swear, I apologize. Those sort of things, they come out here or there. So I think I actually have a very cool story. It's weird when you're embedded in it because you don't actually understand how interesting it can look from the outside. So I just recently turned 28, which is kind of scary-ish. It's kind of that pivotal moment where you should probably get your life together, or that, at least that's the way it feels. So when I started Short and Sweet, how it essentially started was, to be quite honest, I was dating someone at the time, and his friends opened a similar business down here in Ottawa. And he essentially had told me about the business. And at that time I was working in real estate, very passionate about real estate the whole time, mostly the rental component of it. Knew I didn't want to be a realtor. It wasn't really for me selling homes, but I really enjoyed that rental side of it. So he kind of told me about Airbnb, and I said, "Oh, well, what's Airbnb?" This must have been back in 2016. And so I started to learn more about it. Got sort of excited about it, but didn't really want to leave my full-time job at that point. Then I will say the partner that I had at that point, we were very competitive with each other because he also owned a business. So he essentially, I want to say, challenged me to see if I could start the same business and do it better. So on my 25th birthday, I incorporated Short and Sweet. To be quite honest, I was a little drunk on his couch when I did it, and incorporated Short and Sweet. And I remember when I did it, I said, "Well, what's my name going to be for the business?" And that was something I was very caught up on, and what the colors and the brand and what the name would be of this business. And he's like, "Well, it doesn't matter. You can change it later." I mean, you can change it later, but it's a pain in the butt to change it later. So I'm not a huge fan of Short and Sweet BNB. It's growing on me, but that was the name that came out when I was drinking cheap champagne, to be quite honest, for my 25th birthday. So I was very fortunate. Both of my parents, they ran a toy store down in London, Ontario. They actually sold it in 2012 to Mastermind Toys, which has a decent chunk of toys across Ontario. I remember when I started this business, my dad told me not to start this business, or not to start a business in general. And it wasn't really to discourage me, but I think in many incidents, people think entrepreneurship is very sexy. It's not. There's a lot of things that happen. There's a lot of putting out fires. There's a lot of dealing with accounts receivable that become very challenging, that you don't really expect. You kind of think that everyone will pay you. They don't. And you start to learn that along the way. You don't think you're going to get sued. You might. Just those sort of things start to come out. And there's a lot more of that unsexy factor that comes out when you start your business. With that being said, there's a lot of very cool components that happen with it as well. There's a lot of great times that you start to see employees who really take on this business like it's their own and get very excited and fired up. You start to see them grow within while your business is growing as well. And that's a very cool component to see as well. And then the awesome part about Short and Sweet was that it was very niche market and very, no one really knew what Airbnb was when I started in 2017. They might have known it more in Toronto and Vancouver and that sort of stuff, but Ottawa, it really hadn't made its way down here. And they perceived that it was a high risk factor, essentially renting your home on a nightly basis to strangers. And in many cases, actually, because of the bylaws, some of the Airbnbs are not falling within the bylaws, and it's a gray area. It's kind of what Uber went through a couple of years ago within the taxi industry, whether it was legal or not legal. So that kind of made it a cool component. So when I went to Carleton, that's the first slide there. This is something I'm super passionate about. It's called 5 Days for the Homeless. If you go to Carleton University, they essentially sleep outside for 5 days and 5 nights. It's to raise funds for Operation Come Home, and this is something that we still donate to that we absolutely love. But this is where you got to see actually what happens with housing and how most people really put a large value on having a roof over their head. And you'll start to see how some people value a really nice home, some people don't, and the sacrifices that people will make to make sure that they move forward. And I'll start to talk about that as we go through. So then I worked for CLV Group. It's a really well-known property management company here. The most, I guess, recognizable building that they have is called Live Apartments. It's 207 Bell Street North. It essentially was a not so great building that they totally renovated inside. It's got pimped out amenities, hot tubs, dog walkers, dog spas. It's a very out of the box kind of thinking. It's almost like a hotel living style. And I would say this is really, I think, the future of housing here in Ottawa is either lifestyle housing, which I would attribute to things like cottages or living near a ski resort, especially with COVID, now that people have the opportunity to work from home. They might be more susceptible to getting a cottage, for example, and working out of it. So that's lifestyle. Real estate is kind of what I'm super passionate about right now. And then this here is hotel living accommodations, essentially having all the amenities and services that you would have in a hotel, but actually in your permanent residence for 12 months of the year. So I think this is a really cool way that real estate could kind of move. And this is how this company, I would say, pivoted. And this was a huge component of their real estate career, for sure. And people know the building, they know, like, they did a lot of work to get here.
Can I mention something? Can I break in
Yeah.
for a sec? Do you know the Daniels Corp in Toronto?
Yeah.
I think they're the second or third biggest condo builder in Toronto. And I did a little bit of work with them a few years ago. And their tagline for, Daniels Corp is love where you live. And, and if you were working, I mean, what you just said for the last couple of minutes is exactly their philosophy. And it was their philosophy before COVID-19. It's been their philosophy for at least a decade, maybe a decade and a half. And they did something else that was really cool. When I was a younger person, I would take my wife, who was then my girlfriend, to, and we would go to Club Med. I don't know if you know Club Med, but there's lots of Club Meds in the Caribbean and elsewhere. It was originally a French company, and they have GOs, young people, young men and young women who run around, Club Med. They're called GOs, gentil organisateur, means gentle organizer or something like that. And they would run around Club Med, and they would see you, Jen, or they'd see Addie, or they'd see Julie or Annie, and they'd say, hey, water volleyball, let's go. And they would get you up off your butt, if you were drinking alcohol, didn't matter, get up, we're going to play volleyball, we're going to do something, fun and funky. They also, at Club Med, do not allow people to eat alone. So if you go with your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your partner or whatever, you sit at tables of 8 so that you get to know other people from Germany, from the United Kingdom, from Spain, from Australia, from all over the world. And they mix people together. And the Daniels Corp actually borrowed that idea, and on the condos that they build, and they're pretty big, they might be 700 or 800 units. They have, for the first year or two, they have GOs. I don't think they call them GOs because that's a trademark of Club Med, but they have the equivalent of GOs, like camp counselors, running around the building, getting people to socialize. And if you people that play together kind of stay together, you become a community. And the idea is that, if you can encourage that, then people will stay longer as tenants, which is good. They might pay a little bit more rent, or if they're condo purchasers, they might pay a little bit higher price. And it's been a tremendous success. And if they have a building that skews older, it might be bridge night, but if it skews younger, it might be beer pong, right?
Yeah.
So the concepts that you're talking about, I think, are really important. They were important before COVID-19, and I agree with you, they're even more important now.
100%. And I think they did that, I would say, on a smaller scale, mostly because the building's not as large. But they did something called a live local partnership, which essentially meant that you got exclusive discounts to local businesses in the area. So like Greco, for example. And the idea was that if you were more tied into your community, so essentially like if you went to work out down the street at Greco, you might not want to leave because all your gym friends are there and it's so close to your building already. And it was a good way to sort of give back to the community, or but also it was for retention purposes, I would say, as well. Is that, you know, turnover can be very high and very costly of repainting units and that sort of stuff. And if you can keep them tied in there, I think with COVID, this is actually a very big play, because before it used to be how much can we increase the rent from one tenant to the other. I think it might move to how can we start spending money to make sure our tenants stay, especially as the potential rental market could pivot a little bit. So then in 2017, I started Short and Sweet. It was honestly a side gig. I didn't really have too high of expectations, let's say, for this business at the beginning. First 6 months, didn't do much, didn't really focus on it. I actually switched jobs. So I left from CLV to work for Chartered Professional Accountants. I worked there in essentially getting students to become accountants. So you do presentations to them, sales and marketing to them, trying to get them to join the CPA program here for CPA Ontario. Really cool job because you got to meet people in Toronto, travel to Toronto a lot. And a lot of the people that we worked with were very smart, I would say. Toronto's much busier, more hustling kind of area. You start to pick up more on their language, on their skills and their drive, being down there and then kind of flying back and forth. Eventually, to be honest, that was a work from home position. It wasn't really for me in a sense. I kind of started to get this itch to start doing Short and Sweet and start getting it to move. Both of the jobs that I had, I don't want to say they didn't pay well, but rent in Ottawa was very high. So it ate up about, I think, 45% of my salary. And then for both jobs, I needed a car. So that ate up the rest of it. So really I had like $300 left at the end of the month of those. I've always been very cheap. I've always been very conservative with funds. It's something that gives me high anxiety, is any kind of financial stress or that sort of stuff. It's still to this day. That's sort of what makes me tick, is not being able to have the freedom to move or not being able to make decisions that would move this business forward. One of the biggest mistakes when I started was, I think I bought like a broom and a vacuum and some cleaning supplies. So mine, I was very lucky. There wasn't a lot of capital to get it going, but I essentially did the kind of mentality that I would take any money that I got and just put it back in the business and just keep trying to get more. I moved out of my place on Kent Street, which was this cute little condo. I moved out of Kent Street and I actually moved into my storage locker. So I lived in a storage locker, which isn't maybe legal. But I didn't have much choice because we get all of our linens from another company. And they wash and press all of them and dry them. And so they drop them off at the storage locker. But once we started to get bigger, it was large volumes of linens. To put it in perspective, we do about $6,000 a month in just linens. It's a lot of money. But they take up a lot of space and they need to be kept dry and clean. So I rented this storage locker, moved in there, wasn't maybe the best, just got a couch and slept on there. I slept there for about 1.5 years, actually, until I met my current partner. And then he was like, you can't sleep in here anymore. You need to move out. I'd probably still be in there because I kind of actually liked it. It was a very like minimalist lifestyle. I grew up on a farm, so I'm like very handy and that kind of stuff. I like this kind of aspect. So I was lucky. I know maybe some of the businesses that you're thinking of starting might require more capital. Mine could have not required more than $100, a vacuum, a mop, and some cleaning supplies. But pretty much every single time I would get money, I just put it back in and keep trying to get better vacuums or that sort of stuff. Yeah.
So Jen, I did send everybody Chris Guillebeau's The $100 Startup. I don't know if you've read it,
Hmm.
but it's a brilliant book. You know, I've written a few books, but Chris Guillebeau's $100 Startup, it's a book that if I could, you know, I'd rip off the front cover and put my own on there and claim it as my own. It's so good. So
Yeah.
everybody, Addie, I see Addie on the call, and she's a young person, and everybody else, whether you're young or not so young, I send everybody a free copy of The $100 Startup. You should read it. You just heard from Jen that she started this business for $100. So Chris Guillebeau, he's a brilliant young author. He wrote this book a few years ago. It's very easy to read, you know, and he probably has 50 or 100 cases. I don't remember, but I read it. It didn't take very long. Has between 50 and 100 you know, case studies, very short, maybe 1 or 2 pages of people who started very successful businesses for $100 or less.
Hmm. No, I 100% agree. And I think there's a lot of, especially things like Shark Tank and that sort of stuff. They talk about how much capital you raised or that sort of stuff, but no one's like clapping for the person that made it. And maybe their business is only making, let's say, 200 or 300,000, which is a lot of money per year. But they're all clapping for the person who has like huge debt that they owe to someone, and someone owes half their business pretty much. There's we've had people approach us multiple times to purchase or to sell parts of it or expansion. People start to talk about like growing their business bigger and bigger. And I would caution you as you start to grow yours to think about, why do you want to continuously grow it bigger and bigger? Because that was one of my, I would say, biggest defaults, is I just wanted this business to get bigger and bigger and be a household name in it. But eventually you get to the point you're like, it's not even worth it. And that might be something to really think about, is what's really driving you for this business. For me, it's about legacy. I really, really like building things. I really like seeing brand development, see businesses just grow from absolutely nothing. And to be honest, I'm pretty much addicted to the game. I love this game of
Something
entrepreneurship.
else, Jen, that you probably already know, but you are very young, so you might not have figured it out yet. The journey from having a job to being an entrepreneur is almost always a one-way trip.
Yeah.
And you know, if you decided in a few years, you know, somebody says, here's a ridiculous amount of money, I'm going to buy your business from you, and you do it, and you say, well, I'm just going to go get a job, which my students call the journey of the broke. Other people call it a job. You know, you will not last. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, your creativity, your life force is in this business or anything else you do, and working for somebody else will never suit you again. I would make the worst employee, even if I was inclined to get a job. I would be terrible at it. So I'm doing everybody out there who's looking for somebody like me, if anyone is, I'd be doing them a great favor by not going to work for them. And I suspect that would be true of you too.
Yeah, there's no chance that I wouldn't even know how to do it. Yeah, it would be ungraceful, we'll say that, for sure. But I kept my full-time job. That was, I kept it until it got to the point where short and sweet was actually not manageable anymore with me keeping this job, but I didn't have any money, to be quite honest. So I had to do it that way to keep my full-time and kind of do this here or there. Now I was lucky because I worked from home. I could just get up very early, work on my full-time job and work on it at night. And there weren't really set hours per se. So that kind of helps me between the two to take the leap. I still have this video on my phone where I say like, I talk about going self-employed. And it's the day that I gave my resignation to CPA. And it's funny when I watched it, I'm like, oh, you're so young and sweet. You're just like, you're so young, like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. You have no idea what's going to come at you, but it's very sweet to watch it. So
Jen, just so everybody on the call is clear about this, some of the greatest businesses on this planet have been started by teenagers and by people in their 20s. I don't know how old Mark Zuckerberg was when he started Facebook, which is worth hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, but I think he was 19 or 20. Sergey Brin and Larry Page, who started Google, were a bit older, but I think they were still in their 20s. So I think ageism is wrong, whether you're discriminating against somebody because he or she is young or discriminating against somebody because he or she is old. The difference between an old person and a young person is not age, it's mental stance.
Mhm.
The day that you, Jen, or anyone else on this call says, I know everything, you can't teach me anything, that's the day when they're old. So there are old 30-year-olds and there are young 70-year-olds. The difference is that the 70-year-old is still open to learning new things. And that is
Mhm.
really important. And I think you
Yeah.
have that in spades.
And I do think that during COVID, I think this is the time for those young minds to absolutely explode. I think if there was a time more than ever, this is it. If you start to even look at the restaurant business, there's some that have been around for years and years and very, very successful. And I'm not sure on the reasons of closing per se, but then you're looking at some of these smaller, younger business owners who are more tech savvy is part of it too, but they're also ready to pivot very quickly and ready to adapt and do what it needs to do to make it done, to get it done. If you start to see people expanding their patios, you know that they're in this for the fight. If you see them not expanding their patio, maybe they're not, right? But
Well,
there's some, I would say.
talking
Pardon?
about pivoting, some of the restaurants that I've been coaching have moved their restaurants from inside to outside. Just a couple days ago, I walked over to a shopping plaza near where I am, and the entire it's like a barbecue place. The entire restaurant had been moved outside into the parking
Yeah.
lot. And people were there enjoying the beautiful weather and enjoying a wonderful barbecue and a couple of beers, etc. So I agree with you. COVID-19 is a terrible disease. People are dying. But on the other hand, it's a great opportunity for change. For example, in BC, where Addie Bird and her mom Julie live, which is beautiful, they're now allowing people finally, to go to the beach and have a beer. It was illegal before. Well, people can't go to the pub and have a beer. They can. So it's now legal to go and get some takeout from the pub and actually buy a couple of beers and go and enjoy those beers on the beach without getting roasted by the police. And when I lived in Australia for many years, it was certainly, it has been and always was legal to, have a beer. You don't want to be drunk in public, but you could have a beer or two on the
Yeah.
beach in Australia without getting arrested. And when I came back to Canada after many years in Australia, and I realized I had to go to a government liquor store, to buy beer or whatever. And in Australia back then, you could go to the petrol station, and next to the petrol tanks, I'm not saying you should do that, but there were Tuies and Fosters. So I do think that a lot of things that we were so confined and so uptight about, people have a bit of a perspective. And you ask, why is that relevant to pivot and pivoteers? It's because I do think that Jen just hit on a really important point, which is that society is fracturing in many ways. And so especially for the young people here, but even for some older people, and I'm certainly in that category now, it is a tremendous opportunity to pick up the pieces. All right, so
Absolutely.
you got to get going on your slides.
No, I 100% agree. I think if you have any gas left in the tank, now's the time to go. Because I'm a big Gary Vee fan, which some people, you either hate him or you love him kind of thing.
Yep.
But I listen to his podcast every single morning, and he had this person on. It's United States. It's a Chinese restaurant. I don't know the company off the top of my head, but they were talking about COVID and said, "What are you doing with your restaurants?" He says, "Well, I'm opening more." And they said, "Well, why would you open a restaurant right now?" He said, "Everyone's gasped for money. There's going to be people closing here or there." He's like, "Now's my time to absolutely explode." And it was very interesting to hear him talk about
Okay, so back to your slides, kid.
No problem. Okay. So essentially, I mean, Airbnb was not a thing. It's not very cool. It's not very trendy at that point. So when we started it, how I got my first client was actually the same way that I did when I worked for the property management company. I went on Kijiji and messaged every single person who had a place for rent and said, "Hey, your place is for rent. Do you want to convert it to an Airbnb? These are the services that I offer." The best part about Kijiji is most people list their address on Kijiji. So then I created these flyers, which at the time I had no money to create these flyers, but I created these flyers and I wrote down every single address in the Glebe, Centertown, Westboro, that kind of stuff in the downtown core. and went and put then my flyer in their door. So that's how I got my first client. And it was actually this beautiful home in the Glebe. I still have it. And that one got me enough money to sort of do more marketing and hire someone. So I actually hired someone who went out by herself. Her name was Kate. She worked with me at the property management company. She went out by herself, and me and her kind of grew our brands, I would say, essentially together, which I think was a really cool project because we both had no idea what we were doing. So the main thing that I'll say, that the reason that I would say we were most successful is, one, the people on our team were very hardworking and very gritty. I think that's something to look for in an employee, is someone who's very gritty and just will keep going. Keep in mind, Airbnb is not a traditional kind of model in a sense. Things are very unpredictable. Things move very quickly, and you have to react very quick in terms of hospitality. The other thing that people don't tell you about is there's things like prostitution, there's things like mental health, there's suicides, there's that sort of stuff. And that's a very dark side of the business, but it is part of it. The other part that I didn't really put into perspective was the fact that it ran 24 hours a day, which means that the burnout actually happens very quick. I work 7 days a week still. I love working. I'm addicted to it. But it's more that the burnout is just continuously going. So having those support systems really is critical. But the one reason that I would say that we exploded was we created a brand. We didn't necessarily create the business first. We created the brand and what we wanted to represent. And so we had brand boards and essentially talked about our values, what we stood for, what we wouldn't stand for, what policies we wanted to put into place. And I know policies, they're not very sexy either, but the good part about a policy is you can always go back to it and refer to it. So it's the policy says this, this, and this. And that's what we need to follow on this. Now, obviously, you can bend and that sort of stuff. But that helped us kind of adapt. It was creating those brands. So that's what started. Then we started to do a strong social media presence, mostly because people weren't doing that per se at the time, but more of an education side. So we turned into an educator and a trusted brand because we talked about what was good and we talked about what was bad in the industry. And because people didn't function in this industry, we had a lot of knowledge and we were easily wanted to share it. So if you look at Gary Vee, he talks about absolutely everything that happens in his business. And people say, well, why do you give this content away for free? But it's actually a huge selling feature for him. Yeah.
So did everybody notice that Jen used the term trusted brand? It means that Jen understands the meaning and the purpose behind marketing and branding. Marketing branding is not just to build a cool, brand. It's to build trust. And she used that word, not me. So you heard it from me before, that the number one thing in life and in business is trust. And if property owners, think about this, if you own a duplex for $500,000, it's like owning a Lamborghini. Do you trust Jen and her brand and her team to drive your Lamborghini? To give her the keys. That's what you're doing. And of course, some of the properties that Jen would manage would be in the millions of dollars. So a bunch of Lamborghinis, you're giving her 10 Lamborghinis to drive. So trust, so when you're building your brand, my brand is Bruce. It's a very modest brand. It's down to earth. It's kind of homey. My videos are not really that sexy, but it's trusted. And that, when Jen used that word, I just had to chirp in again, Jen. I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but I just had to chirp in that I just want to underline that for everybody. Whatever you are doing, once your business ecosystem starts to trust you, it's almost impossible to destroy your business.
Yeah, and that's something that we work very hard on, is trying to keep that brand intact. Sometimes, people will try and not necessarily maybe go after the brand, but other kind of components of it. And you'll start to see, and if Bruce, if you slide down more, we can talk about that now. Airbnb became a very controversial topic. It became very, people don't really understand it. I would say is the biggest thing, but the media has a lot of influence. And if you don't think it did, look at COVID-19, for example. If you don't turn on the TV, you probably don't know much about the, you know, tolls or any of that kind of stuff that's happening right now. But the same started to happen when we had Airbnb going through potential regulation. So a good example is there's a headline, and I like to refer to it often. It says that I am 28 years old and own 76 properties. I would be probably the wealthiest 28-year-old in the whole entire world if I owned 76 properties myself. But because Airbnb doesn't really release addresses or strong, I would say even data per se, they couldn't really figure out what was happening. So they would pull whatever data that they could to understand it, and the headlines would be wrong. And so that came out over and over again. So actually, if you Google me, there's lots of stuff in the paper about Airbnb regulation, which is kind of, that was a very hard couple months, potentially losing the business. What I will say is, I mean, we've been through this, we've been through other issues that have happened, and now we've been through COVID-19. One thing that we've learned is no matter what happens, we pivot. We're very good at it, to be quite honest. So when this was happening is we started to actually create another business called Flex Property Development. And Flex focuses on 30 days or more stays. So traditional property management, we like to make it a little bit more fun because it has the combination of both short-term, long-term, and everything kind of in between. And honestly, I employed a lot of the same practices that I did at that property management company that I originally started with. So my pivot started October of this year, of 2019. So I actually started to pivot back then because of potential concerns of regulation. No one back then knew of COVID-19 hitting, but I'm glad I pivoted back in that time because it set me up for large success right now. So what's happening right now in terms of short-term rentals, there's not much, to be quite honest. All of them changed into 30-day or more stays. So they essentially went to diplomats who came back, global affairs employees, and another large market that kind of came out was people separating from their spouse. So looking for short-term accommodations through separation. And we do a lot of insurance placement. So floods, fires, that sort of stuff. We house those people while their old home is being rebuilt. So that's been, that was our pivot. Now we pivoted before. So we were already had websites and branding and marketing and that kind of stuff all set up, ready to go. So I'm very, very glad that happened. We dropped our prices considerably. We're running at about 85% occupancy. The one skill that I will say I have, or two, one, I work very, very hard. And the two is I can sell just about anything.
So
and I would say,
hang on a second there, Jen. You're at 85% occupancy even during the COVID-19 thing?
Yeah, but keep in mind, a lot went to diplomats. So they rented since March. Yeah. On longer term. We also had the diplomats who came back from China. So they came back about January. Now, hindsight's 2020. Fantastic. I wish I would have seen the diplomats coming back from China and put it all together. Because if I would have done that, I probably would have done things differently. I think a lot of business owners right now are like, if I would have seen that or put it all together, I would have done something differently. And I think it's the same for most through COVID. The fact is, I think a lot of people will come on, they'll educate you about what's happening with the market and that sort of stuff. No one really knows what's happening with the market. I would just say, make the best decision that you can make on that day and for your business down the road. And if it doesn't work out, I don't think anyone's going to hold you accountable for that. It is what it is, and you'll make a new decision the next day. Because I think people right now are so set up with trying to predict the market or see what will happen. I don't think anyone right now can actively predict the market that well.
So what Jen is saying is 100% right. In the Army, there's an expression that's kind of rude. It's suck it and see. It means if it tastes good, eat more of it. And if it tastes bad, stop eating it. And in entrepreneurship and in this pivot course, and what you will do throughout your life is you will try stuff. And it won't, if it doesn't work, stop doing it. If it does work, do more of it. And some of the pivots we've already heard from Jen are fantastic and appropriate. And to keep your buildings 85% full in this time, and the kind of pivots that she's done is a perfect example of that. But the other side of the coin is this, that if you don't act to change your circumstances, they're not going to change. That's, if you do the same things this year you did last year, they're almost certainly not going to work because the whole world is different. But that's just a truism, right? So you have to be prepared to change. You have to be able to throw some stuff at the wall, see what works, do more of that. And the stuff that doesn't work, this is just as important, maybe even more important. The stuff that isn't working, you have to recognize that and you have to stop doing it.
Mm-hmm. And Gary Vee talks a lot about patience. I think a lot of people are looking, especially right now, for like a get rich quick sort of thing. It's a lot of work, just keep plugging at it, but patience. Just because something's not working right now doesn't mean it won't work maybe down the road. A good example is like handing out those flyers of all the addresses on Kijiji. I maybe got one or two call back, but the good part is the one or two, as long as I provided them good service, they referred me on to the next one or they gave me another property. So that was the biggest thing, is just keep plugging and plugging away.
Something else, Jen, that may help you as well. It is the best place in many cases to find new clients is your old clients.
Yeah.
And so since I'm sure that Short and Sweet Flex is doing a wonderful job, you can always go back to your clients and say, do you have any other properties you would like me to manage? But you could also go back to them, Jen, and say, can I help you buy some additional properties and expand your portfolio and manage those for you? So you could certainly propel the business forward, probably just on your existing client base.
Absolutely. And I think you're going to start to see, because of COVID, people are going to diversify their portfolios more too. So you're going to start to see people that were traditionally maybe all in the stock market move and buy some real estate, or people who, for me, example, I was all in the Airbnb business. But once I started to see regulation potentially come down, that's when I started to say, like, I need to have money in different places. Otherwise, if one crashes, it's a lot of risk to take on. The other thing is that I'm very much, you kind of mentioned, I'm not sure the quote, but the fire to keep others warm at the beginning.
Yeah, you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm.
Correct. And I'm very much I love my employees. I'm very much I do a lot of stuff just to make sure that I do look after them. But right now, sometimes there's decisions that you have to make that maybe aren't the best morally for you at that time, or maybe something that I wouldn't have done. A good example is I had that person who did my marketing with me for years, and she was a contractor, so we just ended that contract at that period of time, and I actually took on the marketing during COVID. The main reason of that is it's a lot about brand awareness during COVID. It's not necessarily a lot about selling, and it was also at the beginning of COVID, it was very tacky to sell too. That I found. So that's why we moved off of that a little bit. The other thing is, because of COVID, things were moving so quickly that a lot of her stuff were pre-populated posts, just because to respect her time, but you couldn't do pre-populated posts anymore, because you couldn't do something like, let's go to the patio on Tavern on the Hills, and then they're like, oh, actually all the restaurants are now closed. So that made it very hard. So that's why we did more organic marketing during that time and more referrals. And actually, to be quite honest, there's been more of an increase in business in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 weeks out of that strategy than there was on our traditional social media strategy that we used to have. Perfect. So a lot of us, we think of ourselves as thought leaders in this industry. It's all about leadership. It's all about education. So we do a lot of host meetups. That's actually a very free and efficient way to get new business as well, because you can do different education seminars and topics around, let's say, short-term rentals or whatever, let's say, your your side gig is going to be. And people then look at you as kind of that thought leader in that industry and as that trusted advisor. So that's a great way to get business. That's how we've gotten a lot of it. And a lot of this stuff when it comes to short-term rental is about ethical business practices in the sharing economy. There's a lot of fear still around the sharing economy. People don't really fully understand it. They talk about Airbnb, your house getting trashed, but right now it's diplomats in there, right? So it's a very different kind of demographic than what's out there, or what people start talking about. So that's why we like to put out, this is actually what happens in Airbnbs. And we talk about the good and the bad, and that's a big component of ours. I'm just going to get to some of the questions that you had on here. The fail points. So we talked a little bit with Bruce about the fail points, but honestly, my biggest fail point was I should have hired an accountant earlier. And I think probably a lot of you will find that. I'm not good at bookkeeping. I don't even really understand it. And so I would really encourage you to do some self-reflection of what your skills are, and then double down on those skills. So for me, it's sales and marketing. So I should double down on that and get rid of the stuff once you can afford it. Get rid of the stuff that you can't do. For me, it's pretty much the accounting operations side of it. I just don't fully understand it, and I waste a ton of time doing it as well.
So Philippe Giraud, I think he's in France today, is asking, so we've got an international audience for sure. If you apply to the city of Ottawa to build an apartment in your house, when you apply for the building permit, is it best to mention to the city that it will be for medium or short or long-term rentals?
So we usually come in after that component of it. So we usually come in once all the building has been done. I'm not a subject matter expert in permits or that kind of side of anything. I'm really on like a tenant side. So I can tell you what the landlord tenant board says. I can tell you eviction processes or how to collect rent or the short term, but I don't know much about the permit side. I guess it's probably not.
So right let me chirp in here one more time then. Philippe, the answer I would give as a friend, not as a coach, not as a mentor, not as a teacher, just as a friend, and certainly not a legal advice, is the less you say to cities, whether it's the city of Ottawa, Austin, Los Angeles, Vancouver, Toronto, Paris, Marseille, I don't care. The less you say to government, probably the better. And when my clients apply for a building permit to do something, they are completely silent about the use. Is it going to be used for home-based business? Is it going to be used for storage? Is it going to be used for Airbnb? Is it going to be used for a sublet? They just are completely silent about that. So I would think less is more in the case of of government. Jen, another question from a landscape architect from Chris on the call today. You mentioned rental experience, and I know Chris understands that, and I do too. What do you think of the live roof deck? Do you think that has a has a role to play in rentals? And there's a second part of the question. So number one, what do you think of their roof deck? I've seen it, by the way. And the second is, if you have waterfront cottage property, can you get a premium on it if you put it on Airbnb?
Yeah, so I think that that first question that you had there, I think that was one of they sort of created like a club experience that you didn't even have to leave your residence to go party. And now it closes at 11 and that sort of stuff, but it created this sense of community. So the hot tubs, they have like a dog run up there. It was a great sense in terms of architecture and use of this space, but it was also good because everyone who wanted to rent there had a dog pretty much. It was one of the, not the only, but one of the more pet friendly places. So dog spas, dog walkers, and this rooftop with a dog run on there. It was a great use of space in terms of community, I would say. And then cottages right now, that's what I was sort of talking about, of that lifestyle. That's where I'm sort of pushing right now, is lifestyle real estate, which essentially, I'm at my cottage right now, which I purchased in May. And the main reason we did that was, one, we wanted to escape the city, but I also know that this thing can make a ton of money right now during COVID. And people contact me daily about renting this property, and all the cottages that we have on the short-term rental, they're all rented as well. Waterfront for sure. I mean, there's a premium pay to that for sure. But I think right now people just want an escape, and that's a staycation because there's nowhere else to go.
Jen, are you doing some extra cleaning just to give people the comfort that if they rent a place for a week or two that they're not going to get sick?
Yeah, we are. I mean, everything is cleaned with 70% alcohol. It was always cleaned with 70% alcohol. It's one of the best disinfectants that you can use. And all of our linens and towels and that sort of stuff, they all go to a commercial plant. They're bleached to no other. And so, yes, everything, I mean, is as clean as it possibly can be. But we're not doing a lot of cleanings anymore, because we used to do, I would say, 60 to 110 cleans a day. And now we do about 4 to 10 cleans a day. So the market's really changed. And there's a point here that we had chatted about of employees and contractors. And that's a very hard debate, I guess, to have. We had, I think it was 14 to maybe our highest was around 26 cleaners that worked with us. They used our company cars. They were on payroll, that sort of stuff. And then during COVID, we actually had to switch to contractors. And unfortunately lay off some of our cleaners. And the main reason was the inconsistency in the market. We used to have a kind of rhythm. And if you look at, let's say, restaurants, they know exactly how much food they need to order, depending on the day, that sort of stuff. It was the same with us. We knew that Fridays and Sundays were going to be very busy, but we didn't know what would happen now with COVID. There's some days where we have no apartments to clean, which is very strange, or no check-ins, because everything's on 30 days or more bookings. And with employees here in Ottawa or in Ontario, you have to pay them for 3 hours of work, even if there's only 1 hour of work. So that's why we moved to using our contractors who have been with us also since 2017. There's a flat fee that you just pay them per apartment. Now it tends to be a little bit more expensive, but they do use their own supplies and their own cars. So it kind of does come out to be pretty close to even. So that was our approach during COVID, was to move towards more of a contractor base when the volume was very small compared to using our employees. Are you still there?
I am.
Oh, okay.
I'm just listening.
Awesome. Sounds good. And then there was another point about my exit plan. I don't really have a full on exit plan. I do encourage you, I guess, when you start your business to know kind of what track you want to go on. And the main reason I don't is because we're actually switching it over to the flex property development. So more on a traditional rental property management side. I would like to see Short and Sweet pivot more to vacation rentals outside of the downtown core. So we were in the process of going to Mont-Tremblant, which is essentially like a ski village kind of area. The Quebec government actually closed down all short-term rentals during COVID. So that made it, we had the decision back about in October of whether to put all of our funds over to Flex or to put all of our funds into Mont-Tremblant. Is someone's mic going off?
Somebody has to use themselves, guys. I'm going to have to find it, and I apologize.
So in my opinion, an excellent timing to this workshop. I still have dates.
I really apologize. I can't find who.
That's okay.
I'm going to see if I have some way to mute everybody. Hang on.
New Netisa system.
Can you anybody else find who this is?
Unless the safety or
It's sweet.
Good.
Does anybody, Kent, do you know who it is?
No, but you could do a mute all and just allow Genevieve as the host. You can do that.
Where do I do the mute all?
It's under.
I see all kind. It's probably under participants.
Under participants.
Yeah,
and
I've got it here now. Thank you. Okay. There's somebody here. I can see Kent is there. You know, I just can't find out who it is. I'm sorry. I apologize. Okay,
Okay, stop though.
I'm going to mute everybody. All right. And then I'm going to unmute Jen. Okay, so Jen, the only two people, I apologize again for that. I'm sorry to everybody.
That's okay, no problem.
I muted everybody. Thank you, Kent. And only two people are speaking now, you and me.
Okay, no problem. That sounds good. So yeah, I guess for some takeaways on those, I mean, the biggest thing is you don't need a lot of money to start any of your side businesses. If you want to pivot from your main business into your side business down the road, I would just say keep your main gig, work extra hard until you can have enough funds to pivot fully over into that, and then just make sure that you understand who you are as a person, as cheesy as that sounds, but what your skill sets are, and find complementary skill sets. Employees can be very challenging, which I think people don't fully realize. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen in everyone's life, and that often comes into, you know, someone not showing up for work, but the task still needs to be done. And so having those extra support systems, I think are really critical. I'm very lucky. I mean, I've got the two people that work for me in the office are probably like the most amazing people that I could ever have in my life. And they both have very complementary skills to me. And that's what has made them as successful and us as successful as we possibly could.
So Jen, I want to comment on an exit strategy. And I'm going to comment on something else you said. You said there's no way to teach people how to get rich quick. And every once in a while, as a real estate investment and business coach, you know, somebody will say, hey, Prof. Bruce, can you teach me how to get rich quick? And I'll get a call like this. Hey, Prof. Bruce, can you find me a 100-unit apartment building that I can buy that's got great tenants and no deferred maintenance? It's got great property management because I don't want to do any work. And it makes $100 a door after paying everything, including the mortgage. So I can make $10,000 a month. And oh, by the way, I want to buy it, no money down. And when I get that call, I say, oh, was there another Rich Dad, Poor Dad conference in your city or town recently? Say, yeah, there was. How did you know? I said, well,
yeah, I'm okay. My laptop just fell.
Okay, so I better not say anything funny.
No, it's okay.
So when I get that call, I said, but now, wait a second. If I found a 100-unit apartment building that I could buy no money down with great tenants and great property management and make $10,000 a month after paying everything, including the mortgage, do you think I would call you? And they kind of go, oh, yeah, maybe not. I said, yeah, maybe not. So with all due respect to everybody on this call and the people who will watch it this evening and over the next few days, the answer to the question, is there any way to get rich quick, is probably no. I certainly don't know of any. And I have to tell you, Jen, when I started coaching, I expected, you know, I don't know why, I expected 90% of my clients to be male. That was not a correct assumption. About 60% were men and 40% were women. And today, it's the opposite. It's now about 60% women and 40% men. And I have never had a female client ask me, how do I get rich quick? Not one. But I have a lot of men who do that. And so I have to re-educate them and say, now, wait a second, if you're looking for a shortcut, the only shortcut I know of is a shortcut to failure. And so if that's what you're looking for, I can't help you and I won't coach you. And that's part of the reason why my sort of ratio has now flipped around. Women are prepared to pay attention to detail, I found, do the work. And they're not looking for shortcuts. And that is an absolute essential. You can tell how many hours, can't even count the number of hours that Jen and her folks, her team have put in to make this a success. Tens of thousands of hours have gone into it in 3 years, right? It didn't happen by itself. So I wanted to comment on that. And then there was another thing I was going to comment on, but unfortunately I forgot.
That's okay. Yeah, no, it's a lot of work for sure. I mean, there's a lot of, like, I still take out all the garbages. I actually really like it. And the only reason, because it's a little bit more quality control. I know it sounds cheesy, but garbage is a big thing, especially if bylaw gets bylaw gets involved. The other thing is it's a lot of like rats and mice and that kind of stuff that can kind of, it spirals out of control quickly.
Sure.
So that's actually why I do the garbage. I also call it like my workout, because you like run them down the laneways and I run back and forth.
So
But there's just something.
I do remember now, Jen, what I was going to say. It was about your exit plan. For almost everybody I coach, not everybody, but almost everybody, their exit plan is to die.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is the only things that I think have worked for most people to prepare for retirement and for a life with less financial stress is to own your own personal business for life and some real estate. Those are the only two things that have worked for me. Mutual funds, life insurance, RRSPs, tax-free savings account, stocks, bonds, penny stocks on the Vancouver Stock Exchange. I don't even know if there is a Vancouver Stock Exchange anymore, but all of those things that the financial planning industry have been selling people, in my opinion, are pretty junky. And so the things that seem to work is to have a personal business for life, one that you own and control, with preferably no partners other than maybe your husband or your wife or your life partner, and to own a little bit of real estate. And so your exit strategy, if you have kids or grandchildren, might be to pass on your business and your real estate, if you have any, to your children and your grandchildren. So your exit strategy is to die. On the real estate side, let's say Jen owned a cottage, and she owned a house, and she owned, say, 4 or 5 residential properties, and so she has, say, 7 properties that she's collected over a lifetime, each of them worth, say, $600,000. So she has 7 properties that were $600,000. You now have $4.2 million worth of real estate, Jen. And so now Jen all of a sudden finds herself an old lady, 78 years of age or 68 years of age, my age, 40 years from now. And she says to her life partner, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put $1 million mortgage on these 6 or 7 properties, so very low loan to value ratio. And over the next number of years, my tenants are going to pay that mortgage off. And I'm able to take that $1 million out of our properties because it's just a loan, tax-free. And then you say to your life partner, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go blow that $1 million over the next 5 years, going on a world trip, and we're not coming back until we spend every last dollar. And so when you get to be a really old lady, and a lot of women now are living into their low hundreds, your exit strategy might be just that. You've taken money out without actually exiting the business or exiting the real estate. Do you understand what I'm saying? So
we're in that process right now. So it's interesting because if you start to see the property management companies in Ottawa that are more developed, they start by managing other people's properties, and then they start purchasing and purchasing and purchasing. And then eventually they start kind of getting rid of those third party management, because it's hard. It is very hard. And we're in that too.
Right. I have no doubt you're a smart person. I mean, and I have to say that we have people in this course who are teenagers, so even a decade or more younger than you. And it's not age. It's these young people, many of them, including you, of course, Jen, are absolutely brilliant. So I wanted to point out to everybody that there are lots of people out there who say, oh, you should sell your properties, or you should sell your business. But when they give you that advice, watch out. They might be business brokers, or they might be realtors, and they can make money. I'm a realtor, but when people come to me and say, I want to sell a property, the first thing I say is, why? Keep it. Refinance it, take some money out tax-free, go blow it on a great trip somewhere, on a great experience somewhere, or help your kids or your grandkids. So you can actually exit without exiting. And I wanted to make sure everybody on this call understands, especially the young people, and of course people who are older, that you can exit without exiting, including the businesses. You can put debt on your business, take it out tax-free as a loan, and you have to pay back, but that's okay. And off you go. All right, Jen, over to you.
Absolutely. Well, that's all that I have right now, but I appreciate you having me on this call. I mean, you guys sound like you're doing wonderful things, and you're super engaged. And I think you have a great leader on this call as well. And Bruce has got a wealth of knowledge that can help you in so many ways. So it'll be interesting to see all the great things that you guys come up with.
So I have a question for you. I was just
Sure.
curious about Airbnb, the platform. You probably know it,
Mhm.
almost certainly know it better than I do. Is Airbnb any use to people who want to go into the medium-term rental market, 30 days, 90 days? You know, can you actually, you know, advertise your property, or would you even recommend advertising your property on Airbnb for 30-day, 60-day, 90-day rentals?
Yeah, I mean, Airbnb is just, I look at that and think there's so many ways that I would change that business, to be quite honest. A good example is a security deposit. It's actually fake. There's not actually one. They don't put a hold on your credit card. That's going to be a very hard business down the road. Airbnb is a platform. I honestly think of Airbnb as a CRM system. It's a booking platform. That's all it is. It's a tech company when it comes down to it. I think people put a lot of moral obligation on Airbnb that they don't put on Expedia, for example. If you even look at who comes to councils, to meetings to talk about Airbnb or talk about short-term rentals, Airbnb's there, but Expedia is not there. Bookings.com's not there, for example. They just borrowed a ton of money at a very high interest rate as well. So to answer your question, yes, we do actually have people who book on Airbnb for a full year,
Wow.
periods of time. Most of those are people that actually have poor credit because there's not a credit check done. We're traditionally here in Ottawa, proof of income and a credit check. So that's one way around it. The other way is it allows you to pay with credit card, which some landlords don't offer here. You're going to see a lot more people booking on Airbnb for monthly stays just to use their credit card, because they also might not be able to provide first and last month's rent down the road. And that might be a very hard topic. But do I think Airbnb as a company is going to fail? No, I think they'll keep borrowing money like they have done before. But there definitely needs to make some changes. A while back, Airbnb talked about actually creating a platform within their platform where you could book for long-term stays. And it would be kind of like if you know the app Neighborly, where it screens tenants, that sort of stuff for you. The good part about Airbnb is when the duration of the stay is over, so let's say someone books for 6 months and they're supposed to check out today, they're supposed to check out today. It doesn't roll to a month-to-month lease like the traditional Ontario residential lease would go. So there's lots of benefits and downfalls of the platform. I think they're just going to have to make a lot of changes and pivot. I don't think they've done a good enough job of pivoting because they were so engulfed in the day-to-day operations that I just don't think someone was thinking high enough level, to be quite honest.
So I have a couple of comments on that. First of all, if anybody's interested, including you, Jen, reach back to me. I did with Tristan Pelche, a young realtor in Ottawa. I did a 1 hour and 28-minute training on proper residential leasing. Tristan Pelche is a brilliant young person. He's a realtor, brilliant guy, and he and I did a 1 hour and 28-minute training on how to do proper residential leasing. In that, there are a couple things that you will find, and you might be interested in this too, Jen. In that, for example, we do allow tenants to pay with credit card, but if they do pay with credit card, there is an additional fee charged, right? So if your credit card processing is 3%, I think we charge 3.25%. If it's 3.25%, we do charge 3.5%. The other thing that we do is we allow tenants to pay their rent on the 1st of the month, half their rent on the 1st of the month, and half on the 15th of the month. That is to help a lot of our tenants because a lot of people get paid every 2 weeks. And we found that to be a very popular program. Another thing that we do is when, let's say a tenant comes along and says, Bruce, I'd like to rent one of your apartments for September 1st. It's now June 18th. And say, I agree. Then I allow him or her to pay their last month rent when they sign the lease today or tomorrow, and then pay their first month rent on the 1st of September when they move in. And if they've elected to go the 1st of the 15th, they only have to pay a half a month on the 1st and 15th. So there's a lot of things that landlords can do to ease cash flow for tenants. All right. So I think that's one of the things that you would learn on that training. So if you just reach back to me by email and you put, you know, residential leasing, proper residential leasing in it, it's a wonderful hour and 28 minutes. It is long training, but it's really worth doing. Whether you're in California or you're in Ontario or British Columbia, wherever, it is proper training. Having said that, every state, every province, every nation seems to have its own rules. So we were talking about Ontario, but many of the concepts do apply to other jurisdictions, although you have to get legal advice on that. One other thing I want to end with is, and we're going to end after this, Jen, is Jen said something I thought was really important, and that is she does not like financial stress. And I don't know if this is accurate. I've been told this, but I have no idea if it's a real statistic. But I've been told that 80% of all marriage proposals are made by men, and 80% of all divorce petitions are made by women, right? And if you ask people why they're getting divorced, many of them will say, well, I don't love her anymore. I don't love him anymore. I fell out of love. You know, he's bugging me, you know, whatever it is. And they have 1,000,001 reasons. But when you actually look through those reasons, many, many, many times you will find that it's financial stress that is causing a breakup in a marriage. Not always, obviously, but many times. People may not say that. But if you have creditors calling you at 3 o'clock in the morning saying, Kent, when can I expect payment? That's stressful. And if your spouse picks up the phone and she or he or your partner gets that call, it's not good for him or her either. So one of the things that I think is really important from Jen's presentation today is to remember that she was very good at controlling her costs. She lived in a storage shed for a year. I'm not recommending that, but you could tell that she was very careful to control her costs, and she understood that cash flow or cash is king or queen. And so I want you guys to remember this, that when you're starting a business, you know, probably the most important thing is to have sales, to have customers, to have clients, to focus on that, and to always look at what your cash flow is. It's not accounting statements, Jen, that really matter as much as how much cash have you got in the bank and can you pay your bills. And so I'm going to leave this today. And thanks again to Jen. Everybody, you can start clapping in our chat and sending applause. And, you know, thank you, Jen, for doing this wonderful presentation. But what I'm going to end with is this, that, and this is my quote, I'm quoting myself here, and that is, don't live within your means, live below your means. All right. So thanks again, Jen. Bravo. Wonderful job. Thank you, everybody, for staying so long. And we'll see you all again next week. And next week, we have Erica Godwin. And Jen, you're welcome to join us if you want. But Erica Godwin is a former student of mine. She was educated at Elmira College in New York State. And she's going to talk about marketing. You know how Jen mentioned that she, you know, Liv, I think, had dog walkers. Erica has this platform where people who are dog walkers and dog groomers, I think too, can build a website and a platform. And she has dog walkers, believe it or not, who are making $100,000 US a year in the United States and probably similar kind of amounts in Canada, building these wonderful websites, dog walking websites, which have a scheduler and all this other stuff. And they can walk like 6 or 8 dogs at a time. They can make, you know, like $100 an hour or more, with tips probably quite a bit more. It's called marketing. That's next week, everybody. So thanks again. We'll see you all later.